tutorials on University of Sports International School-Based Assessment for Information Technology. Today we're going to be looking at creating our queries. Let's go on over to our screen. Here we're looking at our task B in our database, and task B is asking us to use our tables to generate queries for our data. So let's look at what we need to do today. Number one, we're going to be listing all athletes, their events, and the school they are from. Number two, we're going to be listing all female athletes, the event they are participating in, and the name of their coach. Number three, we are going to be doing an update query in this section where we're going to be giving a discount of 10% to all the schools who submitted their registration on the deadline. 4, we're going to be producing a list of all athletes and their age. 5, we're going to be creating a winners list, and that should include the name of the athlete as well as the event the athlete participated in. And 6, we're going to be generating a list of each school and the total number of athletes registered for the school. 5, 7, because of unforeseen circumstances, we are going to have to delete a school from our list. So for this query, we're going to be deleting the third school because that school had an athlete that was over age. And finally, we're going to produce 2 reports, one of our winners and one of our processing fees. So let's go back to our database screen now. In order for us to do our queries, we need to work with our tables. Now, so let's go through and look at what we need to do. First thing you need to do is to select on your menu bar the menu query, create. From that, it gives you the table box, the form box, reports, and other. Good. So in the other section is where we're going to be working with our queries. Now we have our query wizard and we have our query design. Now we want to go to our query design because we have an idea of what it is that we want to do. So we're going to select query design. Now we get this grid, and this grid gives us our show table dialog box. Now remember that we need tables to do our queries. A query is asking question, it's asking for something, so it is searching for data that meets a certain criteria. Good. And so we're going to be searching for some data. We need to know where to find this data. So we are asked to list all athletes. We're asked to list all athletes, their events, and the school they are from. Now we need to determine which tables we're going to be getting this information from. So here we have our athlete table. So we're going to add our athlete table. We want the event that they entered in. So this data is in our event data table. So we want to add that. We want to know the name of the school they are from, and this data is in our school's data table. So we want to add that table as well. We hit close and we have our 3 tables that we're going to be working from. Now this section of the screen is referred to as our query grid. Now the field names are what is represented here. The table is the name of the tables that we have here, and of course we have our sort, show, and criteria option. criteria is where you're going to put your search criteria. So now let's look at what we need to get from our tables. Now once you double click on a field, it will automatically come into each grid that follows. Good. So we're going to select our athlete ID from our athlete table. We're going to select the first and last name of our athlete. So notice when I double click, it comes there, and our show box is highlighted. A tick means that this field and data will be shown in our table when we're through. We want to know the event, and from our event data table, we're going to select the event that the athlete ran, and from our school data table, we are going to select the name of the school from which the athlete hails. So now this is all the data that we want. So once you have selected the field or fields that you want from your tables and your criteria is set, in this case we have no criteria, no special criteria. So all we need to do now is to hit our run key on our toolbar. So once we hit our run key on our toolbar, we should get a table giving us all the records here. So I'm gonna hit run, and there we go. We have our table. You'll notice that we have 39 records in our table, in our event data table and our athlete data table. So here you shouldn't have more than 39 records here. If you have more than 39 records, it means that something is wrong. Good. So we have 39 records, so we know that we did this query correctly. Now we're asked to name, to give the query a specific name, which is called athletes. So we're going to name our query athletes. So you can select the save icon, or you can select this close query icon here. Once you select it, it asks you if you want to save the changes to the query design. You say yes, and it gives you this dialog box that asks you to name your query, and I'm gonna call mine query athletes. So my query is saved, and if you look on your navigation pane, you'll notice that it comes under each table because the data was selected from all the tables. So you'll find that you'll see the same query appearing more than once under each table design. That is simply because data was collected from each table. Now you can change this if you like. You can go and you can just select object type, and it will give you tables first and queries after, but I like to use table and related data, so I'm going to stick with that. Good. So that's it for query number 1. So we now need to go to query number 2. And query number 2 asks us to list all female athletes who are participating in the 100-meter event, as well as their name and coach's name. So let's go back to our query. So here we're going to select the create option. We're going to go to query design again, and we want to know where do we find all this data. And all that data is found in all 3 tables again. So we're going to be working with all 3 tables. And here we want to double click on athletes ID, athlete's first name, last name, the gender of the athletes, the event that the athlete ran, and of course the name of the coach from our school data table. And you'll notice that wherever the data is collected from, the name of the table appears. Good. In this case, however, we have criteria that we're going to be using in our search, and it says all female athletes who participated in the 100-meter event. So we have 2 criteria options. females who participated in the 100-meter event. So on the gender, we want to put F, and you need to put however you write it in your table, that is how you must write the criteria. So if you had F capital, it must be capital F. If you use common F, it must be common. If you use the word female, you must spell out female. So however it appears in your database table, that is how you should have it in your query design. So we want events that are 100 meter. So here we are working with two criteria, and I want to ensure that I have 100 meter in common. So it's 100 meter. Good. So here I want to search for all female athletes who participated in the 100 meter event. And once you have selected all your field names and you have inserted your criteria, you just simply need to hit your run key on your design ribbon, and there you have it. All the females who participated in the 100 meters and the names of their coaches. And we want to save. We want to call this female athletes. So that's query number 2. And you'll notice that it also appears under each table design because data was taken from each of the 3 tables. Let's look now at query number 3. Query number 3 says, at the final planning meeting, it was decided that all schools who submitted their registration forms before or on the deadline would get a 10% discount. In this case, we are going to be doing an update query. Now, once you are doing a query that will change the data in your table, you need to ensure that you make a copy of that table that you're going to be working with. So in this case, I'm going to be working with my school data table. So I want to ensure that I make a copy of my school data table. So I'm going to right click on school data table, and I'm going to say select copy, and then I'm going to paste. It's going to ask me if I want a copy of the school data table. Now you can change the name if you like, but copy of school data table is quite okay. So I'll select OK. Good. So now I have another table in my database called copy of school data. So let's work on making this query possible. So I'm going to select create on my menu bar. I'm going to go back to my query design, and in this case I only want my school data table because all I'm going to be doing is updating my fees accounts, my late entry that each person paid. So all persons who paid on or before the deadline were given a 10% discount. So let's go. So we're going to be using the school data. So we're going to be saving the copy data table. So we're going to be using the original school data. So we're going to add, select close. So we want to select our fees, which in my case is amount due. So I'm going to select amount due. And for my amount due, I am going to update it. So I'm going to select update on my toolbar, and you'll notice the field update appears here. So here I am going to type in the formula that will allow me to update my fee. Now in this case, it's going to be a mathematical formula. So all field names, once you're using a field name in a calculation, you must enclose the name of the field in box brackets. So I'm gonna say amount due, and I want to ensure that it is written the same way as it appears in your table. And I'm gonna close the bracket, and I'm gonna say multiplied by 0.90. This allows me to deduct the 10% that I want from my table. Now, there's another way you can write it if you want to go a different way, right? And let me just put it over here just for show's sake. You could say box bracket amount due, or fees in your case, minus amount due multiplied by 0.10. So what this will do is this will find 10% of the amount due and then minus it from the original amount due. Right? So this will find 10% of the amount due in this section here. So this section, it will find the 10% of whatever the amount is, and then subtract this amount from this amount to get the final cost, right? But so this is one way of doing it, and this is another way of doing it. Now I like to use the easier route, so I'm using this one as my formula, but it's quite okay for you to use that one as your formula. So let me delete that registration teams. In my case, I use 2012 in my data, so we're going to be using 2012 here. However, yours must be 2016, as this is simply an example. So here I have range, the date must range between September 30 and October 31. So whichever registration date, any school rather, that registered before or on the deadline will get this 10% discount that we have. So let's go to our design option, and we're going to select run. And it says you're about to update 2 rows. So we're going to say yes, and our table has been updated. So let us save. We want to save, and we're going to be calling this query discount. And we have our discount query. If you want to make changes to your query, an update query, you cannot double click to open the query in the same way that you would open a regular select query. Because if you double click on this query, it will run the update once again. So every time you click on an update query, it updates the table. So you want to avoid that. So to avoid that, you would right click, and from this option you select your design view, and you can make any change you want to whichever data that you want. Good? And you're good. And never click run twice. Never click run twice. So that's it for our query discount. The next query we want to look at is query number 5. and you're asked to produce a list of athletes and their age. So let's go on over to our query. So we want to create query design, and we want to use our athlete data table, because all the field names that we want should be in our athlete data table. So select it and close. So we want to update. So we're going to select athlete ID, first name, last name, athlete's date of birth, athlete's gender. In this case, however, we want to create a new field. We want to create a new field called age. Age does not appear in this grid, so we want to create a new field called age. To create a new field, you put the name of the field followed by the colon. Now the colon tells you that this is going to be the name of the field. Then we want to add our parameters. Now we're going to be using a function called date difference to get the calculation of the ages of the athletes that are participating. So the function writes like this: date diff, open braces, and you're going to put followed by the field name, date of birth. And remember, I told you, as long as you're using a field name, it must be enclosed in box braces. So this is the field name that we're using, so we enclose it in box braces. Now we want to ensure that it returns today's date, open and close brackets, and then we want to close our brackets. Now let me explain this just a little. As I said earlier, this represents the name of the field, so we want to tell our database to put age as the name of a field, just like we would have gender or date of birth. Date diff determines the difference between 2 years. So this is the difference between the date of birth and the current year. This option here, which is Y in open and close quotation, returns the difference in the years. The date of birth represents the date of birth of the athlete, and this field, date with an open and close bracket, represents today's date. Today that you're looking at this video, the date that is today. So that represents today's date. I have 2 braces here because we have a brace here and a brace there. So you want to ensure that the same amount of braces you use within must be the same amount of braces you use to close. So this brace represents 1 and this represents 1 open brace. So we need to have 2 closing braces. Good. So here our function, and we want to show this field. So we're gonna select our show box. So there should be a comma there. I see. So now we need to run our query. So there you go, there you have it. all your athletes, field name, age, and the age of all the athletes who entered into the event. So we want to save our query, and we're gonna call this query age. Good. So we have query age. So let's look at what we need to do now. So we want to list all of the winners, include their name and their events. So let's go back to our database. So we want to create our query, and we're going to be using our athlete data table, our event data table, and our school data table. So we want to list the athlete ID, first name, last name. We want the name of the school. We want the event, the time they ran, and the position the athlete was in. We are given a criteria. The criteria says all winners. So we're going to be focusing on only the persons who were placed first. So on the position in our criteria section, we want to put less than 2. So we want all athletes who were placed less than second. So this will return all the athletes that were placed first. So we want to run our queries, and there you have it. Only athletes who were placed first shows up on our screen. And we want to save our query. So we're gonna call that query winners. And that query is completed. Let's see what we have left to do. We also have a query to generate a list of each school and the total amount of athletes that the schools sent up for entry into our competition. Good. So in this case, we want to do what we call a totals query. So we're going to go to the same route, select our query design. Now we want to use our athlete data table and our school data table. So we want the school code, the school's name, and in this case we're going to use the athlete ID. And for the athlete ID, we're going to use that field as our field to do our count. So here we're going to select totals on our grid. So we select total, and we want to count by athlete ID. So we're going to count by athlete ID. So this should tell us how many athletes represented the different schools. So let's run our query and see what we get. So there you have it. The school code, the name of the school, and the count of the athletes. So we want to this should represent 39 athletes. So that's 15, 25, 34, 39. So we know that this count was done successfully. So we want to name our query total number. Good. So we are going nicely. We are working on our queries. We have one last query to do, and that query is what we call a delete query. It says that the meet it was brought to the attention of the committee that the third school has athletes that are over age. So we're going to be performing a delete query to remove the records of all of that school and all their athletes. So here we want to go to our query design, and we want to select school data. The school data table, we add it. So we want to remove the third school. So we can have school name, and our criteria is the name of the third school. So let's go over to our school data table and see what's the name of our third school. So my third school is Mountain High School. So I'm gonna copy and paste Mountain High School in my criteria. I just want to ensure that I do the spelling correctly on all that, so I make no mistakes. And then on my query grid, I'm gonna select delete. Good. So we will be deleting Mountain High from the school data table. So we want to save our query as query disqualification. And let us see if Mountain High was removed from this table. Oh, we need to run our query. We need to run to ensure that it is deleted. So we want to run. It says you are about to delete one row from the specified table. So yes, we want to delete that one row. So I'm going to close it. Then I'm going to look at school data and see if Mountain High. So Mountain High and all its record has been deleted. So there you go. So where we had 5 schools, we now have 4 schools. So that's it for queries. In our next session, we will look at creating our reports.